40 minutes before my wife's younger sister walked down the aisle. The wedding was being held in Aspen, Colorado, at her parents' house overlooking the mountains. Guests were arriving, photographers were rushing from room to room, and everyone seemed caught up in that nervous excitement that comes before a ceremony. I was standing beside my truck in the driveway when Kaylee walked over and quietly asked if we could talk somewhere private. There was something unusual about the way she said it. No panic, no tears, just calm. We climbed into my truck without another word. She closed the passenger door, rested both hands in her lap, and stared through the windshield for several seconds before speaking. I need to tell you something before we go inside. My stomach tightened, though I couldn't have explained why. She finally looked at me. Years ago, I slept with Lucas. For a second, I wasn't even sure I had heard her correctly. Lucas wasn't just a friend. He'd been my best friend since college. The man standing beside the groom as best man that very afternoon. Before I could say a single word, Kaylee reached over and gently squeezed my hand. If you notice anything today, she said quietly, or if someone says something, please don't ruin my sister's wedding. Just let today be about her. Then she let go of my hand. Outside the windshield, guests laughed as they crossed the yard toward the ceremony. Inside the truck, my entire life had just shifted and no one else knew it. I was 29 and Kaylee was 26. We had been together for almost 6 years and married for 3. From the outside, our life looked ordinary in the best possible way. We both had stable careers, a modest house in the suburbs, a mortgage we managed comfortably, and families who expected us to announce a pregnancy sooner rather than later. Most weekends were spent grilling in the backyard, helping neighbors with projects, or driving into the mountains whenever we wanted to escape the city for a day. I never questioned where my future was headed because I believed I already knew. Lucas had been part of that future for even longer. We met during our freshman year in college and stayed close through every stage of adulthood. He stood beside me when I proposed to Kaylee, helped me move into our first house, and became the one friend I trusted without hesitation. He spent holidays with us, borrowed my truck whenever he needed it, and knew almost every detail of my marriage. Looking back, I realized the warning signs hadn't appeared all at once. They had arrived quietly, spread across several years. There had been business retreats that seemed to happen more often than necessary. Evenings when Kaylee claimed she had to stay late because a project was behind schedule. The phone that slowly migrated from lying openly on the kitchen counter to always resting face down whenever I entered the room. None of it seemed important then. I loved her enough to explain every strange detail away before she ever had to. I don't remember a single word the officiant said during the ceremony. People stood when they were supposed to stand, smiled when they were supposed to smile, and laughed softly at moments that probably deserved it. I did all the same things automatically, but my mind never left the conversation inside my truck. She said it happened 5 years ago. That sentence kept repeating until it drowned out everything else. 5 years ago, we were already together, not casually dating. We had already talked about marriage, looked at houses online, and planned vacations around our work schedules. Whatever had happened between her and Lucas hadn't belonged to some distant past before me. It had happened while I believed we were building a future together. I started reconstructing those years piece by piece. There had been a business conference in Sedona that lasted 4 days instead of 3 because of an unexpected schedule change. A couple of weekend retreats with coworkers that I never questioned because I trusted her completely. Then there was the small habit that suddenly seemed much larger in my memory. She had begun placing her phone face down on tables. At the time, I assumed everyone eventually became protective of their privacy. Now I wondered whether that habit had started for an entirely different reason. During the reception, I found myself watching instead of celebrating. Across the room, Kaylee was laughing with her sister while Lucas stood nearby, talking to a group of friends. Every so often their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Nothing obvious. Nothing anyone else would notice. But after what she'd confessed, every glance carried a history I had never been allowed to see. That was the moment I stopped searching for innocent explanations and started accepting that trust could survive for years without ever being true. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. The drive home from Aspen took almost 4 hours, yet neither of us tried to fill the silence. The mountains passed outside the windows while the questions inside my head became simpler. I wasn't searching for loopholes anymore. I wasn't hoping she had remembered the dates wrong. I only wanted to know whether the timeline she had given me was absolutely true. About halfway home, I finally spoke. Are you certain it happened 5 years ago? She didn't hesitate. She kept looking through the windshield and answered with a single word. Yes. That answer settled something inside me. Until then, I had been treating the confession as if it were a terrible mistake buried in the past. But the moment she confirmed the timeline without hesitation, I realized the affair itself was no longer the deepest wound. The real betrayal had lasted far longer than 3 days. It had continued every morning she woke beside me knowing I had built my life on a version of our relationship that wasn't real. Every anniversary, every holiday, every promise about our future had been made while she protected a secret that should have been mine to judge. She hadn't only taken my trust. She had taken away my ability to choose. If she had told me back then, maybe I would have left. Maybe I would have stayed. I'll never know, because that decision had been quietly stolen years before I even knew there was one to make. By the time we reached our driveway, I understood something I couldn't put back into words. Nothing had changed that afternoon except my understanding of the life I had already been living. Over the next several days, we barely argued. I discovered that silence revealed far more than anger ever could. Instead of pushing for dramatic confessions, I listened carefully to every explanation Kaylee offered. Each conversation followed the same pattern. First, she insisted it had only been physical. Then she reminded me it happened before our wedding, as though exchanging vows had somehow erased everything that came before. Not once did she begin with what she had taken from me. Every answer seemed designed to protect the lie rather than acknowledge the betrayal. The more we talked, the larger the picture became. Lucas had always known I was completely unaware. Her younger sister had known long before that afternoon in Aspen, carrying the truth until guilt finally outweighed loyalty. Even worse, I slowly learned that a few mutual friends had known pieces of the story as well. They had come to our cookouts, laughed at my jokes, shaken my hand, and accepted invitations into our home while keeping the same secret. I wasn't just questioning my marriage anymore. I found myself replaying birthdays, football weekends, holiday dinners, and summer barbecues, wondering who had looked across the table at me knowing I was the only person missing the truth. The affair had lasted only days, according to Kaylee. The deception had lasted years, supported by people I considered family. That realization hurt in a way I hadn't expected, because betrayal grows heavier every time another familiar face becomes part of it. The situation stopped being only about Kaylee and me the moment our families became involved. News traveled faster than either of us expected after the wedding weekend. I assumed her parents would defend their daughter without hesitation. Instead, her father called and asked if I would meet him alone before anyone else tried to explain the situation. We sat on the back porch of his house with untouched cups of coffee between us. He looked older than I remembered, like the previous few days had taken years from him. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You deserved the truth long before today." I didn't answer. I simply let him continue. He admitted that he and his wife had argued for years about something neither Kaylee nor her sister realized had shaped them. His wife believed that anything which happened before marriage belonged to the past forever and should never be allowed to threaten a family afterward. He never agreed. To him, loyalty began the moment two people promised each other a future, not the day they signed a marriage license. Listening to him, I realized we had entered the same relationship carrying completely different definitions of faithfulness. I believe commitment started the day we chose each other exclusively. Kaylee believed the wedding ceremony drew that line instead. Neither of us had ever spoken those beliefs aloud because we assumed they were identical. For the first time, I understood that the affair wasn't the only reason our marriage stood on unstable ground. We had built it on two completely different ideas of what loyalty actually meant. A few days later, Kaylee asked if we could sit down without interruptions. She said I could ask her anything, and this time she promised she wouldn't avoid the answers. I agreed, not because I expected comfort, but because I wanted the timeline to stop changing in my own mind. "So tell me everything," I said. She nodded slowly. "It lasted 3 days. I waited. It happened during the Sedona conference. We met twice at the hotel and once before everyone flew home. After that, it ended. There was no dramatic confession, no attempt to deny what had already been admitted. She insisted she had never been involved with Lucas again and swore she had never cheated after our wedding day. She repeated that point several times, almost as if it could outweigh everything that came before. When she finished, the room stayed quiet. Finally, I looked at her and spoke as calmly as I could. The hardest part isn't that you lied to yourself back then. She raised her eyes. It's that you kept lying to me for 5 years after you decided what kind of husband I deserved to be. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For several long minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't filled with anger anymore. It was filled with the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. I realized I wasn't searching for one final explanation. I already had every answer I needed. What remained wasn't a mystery. It was simply the question of whether any amount of honesty, arriving years too late, could ever repair a decision that had stolen my right to choose. After that conversation, almost nothing changed on the surface. We still lived under the same roof, ate at the same table, and passed each other in the hallway every morning before work. To anyone looking from the outside, we probably appeared like a couple trying to repair a difficult chapter. Inside the house, though, everything felt different. It no longer felt like our home. It felt like a place where two people happened to share the same address while deciding whether they still shared a future. Kaylee threw herself into proving she was serious. She blocked Lucas on every platform without waiting for me to ask. She handed me her phone one evening and quietly said I could look through anything I wanted. I never picked it up. The problem wasn't whether she was hiding something today. It was that she had hidden something for years. Lucas tried reaching me more than once. I saw his name appear on my screen several times over the following week. Long messages, missed calls, an apology waiting behind every notification. I deleted each one without opening it. Whatever explanation he wanted to give belonged to a version of our friendship that no longer existed. Gradually, both families stepped back. After offering their opinions, they accepted that the decision wasn't theirs to influence anymore. For the first time since that afternoon in Aspen, the noise around me began to fade. I stopped feeling pressured to make an immediate choice. The truth had already changed everything. Whether I stayed or walked away wouldn't change what had happened. My only responsibility now was deciding which future I could honestly live with. One morning, about 2 weeks after the wedding in Aspen, I woke before my alarm and sat alone on the back porch with a cup of coffee. For the first time since Kaylee's confession, my mind wasn't racing through timelines or replaying conversations. I realized I had stopped searching for the perfect answer. I no longer cared about assigning percentages of blame or deciding who had suffered more. None of those calculations could return the years I had spent believing in a version of our marriage that never truly existed. What hurt most wasn't the affair itself anymore. 3 days, no matter how painful, would always remain only 3 days. The real damage came from understanding that my trust hadn't been destroyed the afternoon she confessed inside my truck. It had been broken years earlier, and I had unknowingly carried the weight of that invisible fracture through every milestone we celebrated together. Every anniversary photo, every holiday gathering, every conversation about having children suddenly belonged to a history I could no longer remember without questioning it. I looked at our house across the yard and realized it hadn't changed at all. The paint was the same. The porch swing still creaked in the morning breeze. My truck was parked exactly where I had left it the night before. Everything outside looked familiar. Only my understanding of it had changed. That realization settled over me with a strange sense of calm. Sometimes the hardest truth isn't discovering that someone betrayed you. It's discovering that the life you trusted had quietly become something different long before you ever learned its real story. I still don't know whether a marriage can survive a betrayal like ours. Maybe some can. Maybe others were already broken long before the truth finally surfaced. What I know is much simpler than that. One quiet conversation, 40 minutes before someone else's wedding, erased years of certainty I thought could never disappear. Not because Kaylee created a new reality that afternoon. She simply revealed the one I had been living without knowing it. For years, I believed trust was something that vanished in a single dramatic moment. I was wrong. Sometimes it disappears silently, years before anyone notices, while ordinary life continues exactly as it always has. You keep celebrating birthdays, making mortgage payments, planning vacations, and talking about the future, never realizing the foundation beneath all of it has already cracked. Looking back, I don't remember that wedding as the day my marriage ended. I remember it as the day I finally saw my life clearly for the first time. The truth hadn't arrived that afternoon in Aspen. It had been waiting there all along. I was simply the last person to see it.
That's the end of the story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos for you, so pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.